coming back to Law and Crime. Today, we go back to Connecticut for a contempt hearing that took place for Michelle Troconis. She was convicted on all 6 counts against her related to the disappearance and death of Jennifer Dulos at the start of the month. She was charged with conspiracy to commit murder for allegedly helping her boyfriend Fotis Dulos in the death of his estranged wife. Now, victim Jennifer Dulos was last seen on May 24th of 2019 dropping her kids off at school. Her body was never found, but she was pronounced dead at the start of Troconis' trial. Her husband, Fotis, died by suicide before he could be tried for murder. Now, today's hearing has to do with sealed documents that the state believes were on the defendant's laptop during trial proceedings back in February. And after seeing evidence that certain custody documents were up on the defendant's computer, Troconis was charged with contempt of court. Now, before I bring in my legal panel to discuss, let's listen to those arguments as they unfolded.
That Ms. Troconis appears to have a text from a sealed report on her monitor in a very high, big font. The beginning of it reads, "Dr. Krasner told me," in quotes, which the only reason why the state is reading that quotation, Your Honor, is that is the note. Now, the state brought this to the court's attention. This is also not the first time that we have heard that Ms. Troconis has been putting things on her laptop for other people to see. For instance, there's actually an article in the Stanford Advocate that during, I think, either Christine Roy's testimony or Kristen Medell's testimony, she had a article with a headline that Dr. Lee is held liable for impeaching or something to do with his testimony. The only implication there was an attempt to. It was related to the blood results in his testimony. The only implication to have that up is an attempt to either put that out in the press or for a witness to see. So this is the second time we've had a concern. We didn't address that first with the court because it was we didn't see it or hear anything. We actually read it in the Stanford Advocate. The concern the state has is this notion that she would have access on her device to a report that it starts off that a member of the audience is able to see, which is clearly under seal. So that is concerning. The second major point is that that was displayed for the public with a news camera behind us, and that she shouldn't even have read it to begin with. So it is a huge concern at this point that I'm bringing to the court's attention. We can't gloss over the serious nature of the idea of a violation of her having access to the report, her displaying it for everybody to see, essentially. And 3, also there was another instance where we're not sure if she or a member of her family was mouthing to the jury earlier in this trial. So now we're at a point where this has to be raised on the record. And I bring that to the court's attention to address in some way.
So at the conclusion of today's hearing, both sides agreed to meet with the judge in the coming weeks, and they set a new court date to May 15th. And with that in mind, my legal panel of trial attorneys Bob Hilla and Lateef Gray are back with me. What do you think should ultimately come from all of this? I mean, she was already found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, Lateef.
Well, it seems like the prosecution and the state want their pound of flesh out of this defendant. She'd already been convicted, like you said, of conspiracy to commit murder. So she's going to get a lengthy prison term when she's sentenced. So if I'm her attorney, and I would ask that the state just dismiss it and, the judge admonish her not to do this again, which trial is over, so she won't have the opportunity to do it again. I would ask that the court dismiss it, and that she be admonished not to do it again, and that we deal with her sentencing on the serious charge of conspiracy to commit murder.
And Bob, how did the defendant get these documents on her laptop in the first place, you think?
Well, that's a serious question for the court to decide here, because apparently the lawyer was the only one who had access. Now, whether she knew how to flip it up on the lawyer's computer, he was busy trying the case, and she was doing that. That might be something that, may come into play here. But at the end of the day, what's going to really decide this, because it's separate from the case, really, it doesn't seem to be that there was any impact on the verdict. And she was convicted, as Lateef mentioned. But it's really a separate question. Did it impact the dignity and the authority of the court here by her doing what she knew she wasn't supposed to? And that is the question. And did it obstruct the administration of justice here? Those are really the two things this court is going to look at. It's going to have to be put in a formal charge against her, and it's going to have to be heard by another judge.
All right, I want us to hone in here because let's go back to the day in court when this was actually first discovered by the state. Take a listen.
And I will say it was my understanding that any video that was taken would not display our screen, so it would not be available to the public. We've taken great pains to work with people who are handling the cameras and the videos to ensure that all of our communications, whatever's on our monitors or on our desk, remains private and inaccessible to other people. As far as the report is concerned, I'm not sure how anybody in the audience would know the contents of what would be in a sealed report. I know that I have not reviewed the report in its entirety. I have never seen it on a computer. I have reviewed the last 4 or 5 pages that I was provided, and they were in paper form. I can say that I have never shared the contents of the report with Ms. Troconis. I do not know, in fact, whether she was reading from a memo or what it was. I don't intend to ask her and discuss it at this point in time. What I can say is I know there have been a lot of notes that have been passed back and forth with information that is now just being shared. If I had known that there was an issue with the public possibly viewing what was on our screens, I would have taken steps to ensure that that wouldn't happen, and I can do that from here on.
Court's first concern is, and the court understands that we are talking about the custody evaluation.
Yes, Your Honor. And the only reason, again, while I indicate that, is I do believe the individual who saw it is a close friend of Jennifer's and would recognize a name that was on the report or on Ms. Troconis's computer.
Well, what the court has to task the State Attorney's Office with is to find out as much information as it can as to how, first of all, the individual recognized whatever was on the screen.
Yes, Your Honor.
How they were able to see it from their vantage point. Was it broadcast? Was it live streamed? And the court is just going to have to begin tomorrow's proceeding without the jury, because what is happening at this point is there appears to be, the court has issued a protective order and sealed that custody report. If that custody report is being disseminated, and if it's being disseminated essentially with the involvement of the defendant, then the court has to take certain action, because then it's a violation of a court order and there would have to be a contempt hearing.
So as you can see, Judge Randolph agreed that this situation was serious enough to hold a contempt hearing, and we now know that there will be another hearing in May on this subject. And with Bob and Lateef back, could the defense team here get in trouble at all for letting Michelle Troconis have this document up during the trial? I mean, at the end of the day, was it really on her or her team? Bob, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I didn't realize Carrie Luff was the one who had the sole access to this. So she's in a tough spot, but what we saw was the excerpt from the trial. So in that sense, the judge is saying, hey, look, we got to find out what happened here. How did this witness even recognize what was on the screen, and how did they see it? And then the next thing is if the defendant caused that, then she violated a court order. So again, at this point, the trial's still going on, and the concern the court's going to have primarily is stop any bad conduct, but also make sure it doesn't impact on what the jury's got to do later in the end of the case.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Lateef. I mean, someone in the gallery saw the documents on the defendant's laptop. I mean, could this be a wider issue of how to keep all documents private during court proceedings like this?
Well, it could be, but I think the key issue here is that the report was sealed and the defendant wasn't supposed to have access to it. So if one of her attorneys who had access to the report is found to have willfully disclosed this report to her, then that attorney could be in some trouble because that attorney essentially disregarded a court order, which as attorneys we know is a big no-no. So her attorneys could be in trouble if they're found to have, like I say, willfully disclosed this confidential report to the defendant.
Bob, do you think this is a wider case? Is it beyond just, sealed documents that Michelle Troconis had?
Well, I think Latif's comments are right on target here. And plus, there's a different issue for the lawyer. If it's found that lawyer took part in this contempt issue, that lawyer can also be subject to an ethics proceeding and could have their license placed in jeopardy or subject to some sort of disciplinary action by the bar authorities in that state.
Now, another interesting tidbit here, the document allegedly had sensitive information about Farber Dulos and Jennifer Dulos' children. Latif, how is that part of it all problematic here?
Well, it's problematic because it's sealed, number one, and number two, in order to get records related to minors, there's a whole procedure you have to go through in court and file motions and do things like that. So if she had confidential information related to minors that was given to her by her attorneys in violation of a court order, that's very problematic.
Latif, you're completely right, Bob. When it comes to minors, this opens a whole other can of worms, doesn't it?
Well, and I think that was the reason for this being sealed, because people other than the defendant in the case and or the victim had issues of protection or an interest in protection, especially these minor children, who I think at this stage may have still been minors. So, with respect to that impact needs to be protected. That's a separate issue even beyond the case, which is why the court took the action it did in sealing that record.
Now, Latif, do you see Michelle Troconis appealing anytime soon?
Well, she'll probably appeal her criminal conviction for the conspiracy to commit murder, absolutely. In most cases, when there's a conviction, they file usually a motion for new trial, and if that's denied, then they file appeal. So I definitely see her appealing her case.
Bob, what do you make of it?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, it's a separate issue. The defendant is going to take a crack at the appeal process to see if there was some defect in the process of the trial that led or could have led to the jury to come to a different result had that error not occurred. So that, I think, is what we're going to be looking at on the appeal, not this issue.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We do need to sign off. Latif Gray, thank you so much for joining us, Latif. We hope to see you again very soon. Great insight and analysis.